Right after he assumed office for a third term, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is en route to Italy, his first foreign trip in this term. Leaders of the world's 7 wealthiest large democracies are meeting in Italy from today for the annual G7 summit. This is, remember, the 50th one. They'd hope to draw consensus on vexing global issues, including the two wars, the threat posed by China's rising economic might, and the recent shift in the European political chessboard towards the far right. But for India, who has been invited as an outreach nation, the summit will be crucial for more reasons than one. India plays an important role in the Indo-Pacific region, serving as a counterbalance to China's aggressive assertiveness. Japan, the only country from the region which is part of G7, shares a strategic relationship with India, and together, both the countries aim to disrupt Xi Jinping's plans. European G7 members like the UK, France, Germany and Italy are increasingly interested in the Indo-Pacific to capitalize on the economic opportunities and address regional security concerns. The G7 summit will also be a place where Prime Minister Modi and Justin Trudeau will be present together at a time when India-Canada ties are perhaps at their lowest and the Khalistan extremism issue perpetuating on Canadian soil is a big concern for India. With PM Modi pitching India as the voice of the global south, it remains to be seen how much this voice is heard by the world. To talk more on this, on Nation Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Ashok Sajjanhar, former ambassador. I'm also joined by Mr. Michael Kugelman, Director, South Asia Institute. Good evening. Namaskar to both of you. Michael, let me begin with you. You know, this is a crucial summit that is happening at a time when the world is witnessing two wars. We're already in the post-COVID era. Economies are grappling. Now we have the two wars. How do you see this really panning out in terms of the top focus of the G7 countries?
Right, indeed. Well, as you suggest, the wars in Ukraine and in Gaza, as well as the broader instability in the Middle East, will dominate the discussions at this event. And I think India's presence there is very significant, given that India is a country that has good relations with all of the key players involved here, whether you're talking about Russia or Ukraine or the Israelis or the Palestinians or the key Arab partners. And it has been seen by a number of observers and perhaps governments as well as being able to play some type of potentially useful role down the road, whether as a mediator or something like that. The bottom line is that it having a seat at the table at this meeting, at this G7 summit, I think it makes a lot of sense, not to mention India currently being the world's fastest growing major economy. It makes a lot of sense for it to be at this G7 summit for that reason alone. And finally, I would say that this is a useful opportunity for Modi to carry on this goal of trying to project India as a bridge between the global south and the developed countries, something that it did quite effectively, I think, when it was the G20 president last year. And here at the G7 summit, some of the top issues on the agenda will be issues that are of great import to the global south, such as climate change mitigation, among others.
Sure. Ambassador Sajjanhar, one of the key concerns, of course, has been the stability and the peace in the Indo-Pacific region. And that's why, and that's how India's role becomes very crucial so as to, help the G7 and itself, the Southeast Asian region, counter China's expansionist policy. How do you see that moving forward?
Thank you very much, Shreya. And you are very right. I think Indo-Pacific has really emerged as one of the central, one of the pivots, if I could put it, in terms of the evolving geopolitical security and economic architecture. And in that sense, it is important. And we have seen that over the last several years, China is becoming very aggressive, very assertive. And there is no other country in the region which can collaborate, which can work towards pushing back against Chinese ambitions. We have done it, on our own borders, national borders, the line of actual control in 2020, when China decided to accumulate about 50,000 troops and heavy armor and equipment on our borders, whether it was in Doklam in 2017, etc. So I think the Chinese challenge has been taken up in right earnest by India, and India is focusing very much not only in terms of development of infrastructure on our borders, but also in terms of taking our economy forward. Today, we are the fifth largest economy after having been the 10th largest about 10 years ago. Very soon, we are going to become the third largest economy and then also a $5 trillion economy. In addition to all this, Shreya, we are engaging our partners, in the role of Vishwabandhu or a Vishwa Mitra, working together with all partners. And all the G7 countries with whom Prime Minister Modi will be interacting, meeting. I think we have very good relations, very positive
Yeah,
relations. Prime Minister Modi's presence in Italy will help us to take the relationship forward. We have seen that as far as the United
sure.
States is concerned, it's emerged as the most consequential partner for India today. Last year, just around the same time, we had the visit
Yeah.
of Prime Minister Modi to Washington, D.C., in response to invitation from President Biden for the state visit. And he was the
Yeah.
first Indian leader to address the U.S. Joint session of the Congress on two occasions. So the point I'm making here is that
Yeah.
across the
Ambassador
board,
Sajjanhar, since you mentioned United States, let me take this across to Michael.
yeah,
Michael,
sure.
Joe Biden has reached there. He is in Italy. And the US perhaps will be pushing for an agreement for a consensus on a $50 billion loan to Ukraine to rebuild itself. Do you see that happening at all this time around?
Sorry about that. There's definitely going to be a big push, for sure. This is going to be one of Biden's major goals. It's unclear what'll happen, but clearly there's going to be a lot of consensus, I think, within the G7, the formal G7 members, to try to pursue that goal. It's going to be one of many discussion points on the table here. But yeah, this is something that President Biden will really want to do. I mean, it's been a consistent policy from the Biden administration since the war broke out to do as much as possible to supply Ukraine with assistance in ways that go beyond, obviously, putting boots on the ground, so to speak. But we'll see what happens. But the G7, for the most part, these are countries that get along, unlike the G20, where there's naturally going to be a number of disagreements on a variety of issues. I think that if you're looking for a big deal to come through like that, that consensus would be achieved at a summit like this. But we'll see what happens. There's always a level of unpredictability baked into these things.
Sure. Ambassador Sajjanhar, I don't know if both of you have been following the memes on social media. There's a lot of memes about the hashtag melody, and the Prime Minister of Italy herself had contributed to that, with that selfie with Prime Minister Modi. But aside from memes, aside from all the humor that's been going on, how do you see really the India-Italy relationship? We've been building on it. We've now sustained that healthy, friendly relationship. Moving forward, the fact that India has been called as an outreach nation in the G7 summit, it's not part of the grouping of seven, reflects a lot on the kind of role that it has assumed at the global table.
Yeah, you're right, Shreya. So, not commenting on the memes, meaning they are funny and pleasant, and I think they give a lot of joy to many people who see them. It's humor. I think it's clean, good humor, which is very welcome when we see that politics otherwise is becoming so very dirty. But more seriously, I think I think you did mention, gave a brief mention to the elections to the European Parliament. So I think if there is one leader who has emerged
Yes.
much stronger in these elections, it is Giorgia Meloni. She has done
Yes.
exceedingly well in her right-wing, elections. All the others, whether it is Olaf Scholz or Macron or anyone else, they have not done so well. And Italy-India relations have been growing. They are robust, they are vibrant, they are dynamic. I think when we had the state visit of Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni to India last year in March, I think, that was, we upgraded our partnership to to strategic partnership. And then she was also in India for the G20 summit. And I think it is particularly significant that the first visit of the Prime Minister after being sworn in as the consecutively the third term Prime Minister, it is to Italy. I think it also needs to be recognized. You said very correctly,
Yeah.
Shreya, that India is not a member of the G7, but India, at least under Prime Minister Modi, seems to have become a permanent invitee to all the G7 summits, starting from the summit in Biarritz in France in 2019. I think each and every summit has been attended by Prime Minister Modi, which really sends out a very clear and a very strong message that none of the main challenges that afflict the global community today, whether it is climate change, it is health, it is pandemics, it is terrorism, or any of the problems on global economy, none of the problems can be resolved without the presence of India. And India has emerged as a voice of the global South. So I think there are all these aspects which Prime Minister Modi will take forward.
Michael, one of the most interesting aspects this year at the G7 is the Pope leading the talks on artificial intelligence. That's going to be interesting to see, isn't it?
Is that to me or to Michael?
Sorry, was that addressed to me? Sorry about that. Yes, no, absolutely.
This is for Michael,
I think the
Ambassador.
broader
Sure.
story.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
Ahead. Go ahead, Michael.
All yours. Oh, sorry, there was a delay there. I think the bigger story here is the fact that AI is going to be featured so prominently on the agenda. I mean, we know that this has become an obvious thing.
Yes.
This is such a big issue in our world now, and India certainly has a big role to play here. And I think there's reason to believe that AI could become a bigger focus
and India's
of
been
India's
pushing
relationship
for
with the
a global
US.
law, a global guideline for all countries to follow in AI.
And this G7 summit will be a great opportunity to share some ideas for these world leaders to share some of these ideas. So I think this is a really important development, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more summits like this where AI is one of the big issues. Because you're right, developing those shared principles, shared governance ideals, and tactics that certainly will be a need of the hour. So I'm glad that this is on the agenda.
Yeah. And it's going to be interesting what the Pope says. Ambassador Sajjanhar, I also want to talk about the African continent and how it's being featured prominently across summits now. At the G20, we had the African Union joining the grouping. Now at the G7 summit, we have Africa being invited as a special invitee. Clearly, a lot of strategic significance and importance being given to the African continent as well.
Yeah, you're very right, Shreya, because I think even in the outreach summit and the deliberations, Africa, in addition to the Indo-Pacific, the Mediterranean, and the artificial intelligence, these are issues that are going to be deliberated upon. So Africa, I think, is very important. And you have seen whether it is Algeria, it is, some of the other countries, Mauritania, they have been invited from Africa. I think there is also this big issue, big problem. Of course, there is huge opportunity as far as Africa is concerned, because even demographically, even in terms of the economic growth, many of the very rapidly advancing, rapidly growing economies are today in Africa. So I think that is being looked at. But I think there are other issues also, Shreya. One of them is migration. And, I come to migration because of the European parliamentary elections. And that is going to be a big issue because there's a surge to the right. And from Africa, we've seen whether from Sudan, Somalia, etc., there is so much of migration that has been taking place. But I think it is very good. And we have...
Can I also ask you... Ambassador Sajjanhar, can I also ask you, aside from this, one of the most important issues that perhaps we'll also be looking at is when Prime Minister Modi, if and when he meets with the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, and whether he does talk about the Khalistan extremism perpetuating on the Canadian soil. Do you expect that to happen? Do you expect Prime Minister Modi to talk about it?
Okay, let me put it this way, Shreya. If the meeting takes place, and I think it's going to be a big if, because I think the Prime Minister is going to be there, Shreya, just
Yeah.
for a day. And there are so many important leaders, not only the G7 members, but there is also MBS from Saudi Arabia, the president of UAE, there's the president of
Yes.
Argentina. There are so many other leaders. Brazil is going to be there. South Africa is going to be there. I don't think the Prime Minister will have the time really, because at this point of time, there is, not much heft that I think can be given to the relationship. And if the meeting does take place, there is no other issue to discuss but the support, but the political space that Canada is providing to anti-India elements, particularly Khalistani elements, and the sort of threats and intimidating, intimidation that they have been conducting against Indian interests. But I don't think that this would be very meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister would be very high on the
Okay, we'll have
agenda
to wait
of
and watch,
Prime
of
Minister
course,
Modi.
Ambassador Sajjanhar, whether that happens. But quickly, before I wrap up, Michael, to you, 30 seconds. Just, if you had to list out the top 3 areas where perhaps you could see some sort of rift within the G7 or at the summit in those sectors, what would they be? Where would more consensus be needed?
Well, I mean, I think again, it's hard to think of any areas where there's going to be a significant divergence. If we're talking only about the 7 formal members, right? I mean, if you want to talk about how India and some other countries that are present there as outreach members might respond to discussions about Ukraine, there could be some issues.
Sure.
But I think that there could be a lot of effective conversations on a number of issues. These 7 countries see eye to eye on quite a few things these days.
All right. We'll leave it there. We'll have to see how this really pans out and what Prime Minister Modi says there at the summit. All eyes on that. Former Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar and Michael Kugelman, thank you very much for speaking with us on Mirror Now and sharing your perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shreya.